So, you know who Gandhi is?
No.
Yeah, you do.
Okay, I do.
Well, the thing about it is he walked around barefoot a lot. So, his feet got really calloused.
Okay.
Also, he didn't eat very well, which meant that he got really frail. And another result that people don't realize is he had really bad breath. So I guess you could say that he was a super calloused, fragile mystic, hexed with halitosis. Welcome to the PastorCast.
Skittle-a-do, I said, bim bop. Skittle-a-do, I said, bim. Skittle-a-do, I said, skid out and bop. Skittle-a-do, I said, bim bop, boom. Skittle-a-do, I said, bim bop. Skittle-a-do, I said, bim. Skittle-a-do, I said, skid out and bop. Skittle-a-do, I said, bim bop, boom.
Welcome to the show, everybody. That's a different kind of intro, Scott. You really took us a long way around for that.
Yeah.
Man, what a show this is going to be. So, we got a big announcement. Big announcement coming up at the end of today's episode. Stick around for that.
You don't want to get away from this episode. You've got to be there for the big announcement.
Tune in. You're already tuned in. Stay tuned in. So, Scott, how's your week been?
Pretty good.
Yeah, I just got back from Orlando. Jake and I went up there, and we went to a worship technology conference, and that was really cool.
Okay.
We've been talking about worship on the PastorCast, and part of that is using the gift of technology. God has blessed us with, all these means to share the message, and so we spent a day learning about the latest and greatest and how to use it for God.
Okay, that's neat.
Yeah, check out these pictures. We really, really had a good time up there.
Man, those were great. But, I heard that the day before you were down in Lake Worth and you were filming, and actually you have a video of falling through a computer desk. Let's watch that.
Amen.
All right, what's the backstory of that, Bill?
All right, so Jake and I were down in Lake Worth. We're doing a little filming because we want to support the preschool down there, get their enrollment, and let everybody know everything. So I'm crouching down to get on the same level as the kids to film, and I'm just resting gently on their computer desk. When, of course, I crush it underneath my weight and just go, And to the kids' credit, they just keep on praying.
They were trying to pray.
Yeah, they keep on praying, and then afterward they're like, "What did you do?" And I'm like, "Sorry." But anyway, yeah, it's been, man, what a week.
We're in a funny mood today, obviously.
Yes.
But here it is. So we've got a great topic. Before we get to our big announcement, the topic is still worship. So let's get started. All right. So today, our topic, as we talk about worship and continue to do so, is how do we worship well? And I think that's an important question. We're going to, in a way, flip the script today because, in a way, we've been evaluating worship, the elements of worship, what goes into worship. But now, instead of the evaluation being on what goes into the worship service, the evaluation is more on the person who comes.
Yeah. So today we're wrapping up the series with a very practical and, we hope, helpful discussion of how we as individual people can worship better. And like Scott said, it may seem a little foreign, this discussion, because in our society today, you can now rate churches on Facebook and give them 5-star ratings on Google. You rate churches like restaurants on Yelp. I liked this about the service. I didn't like this about the service. It was too light, too dark, too loud, too soft, too fast, too slow, too traditional, really the church has become a place to come to as a consumer to evaluate according to our own preferences and then rate and move on to the next one to try to find something better. And like you said, we're going to flip the script today and really get back to what I think is more like has existed throughout the history of the church.
Right.
You think back to the early worshiping people of God in the temple and the tabernacle, and I can't imagine that these people would come, as consumers to evaluate. Well, I really didn't like this about the tabernacle.
Right.
The gold.
Obviously,
I prefer silver to gold, and what's with the incense? It aggravates my nose. So part one of what we're talking about today is just getting our mindset a little bit different for the next 15, 20 minutes or so, just to do what feels very unnatural, and that is stop evaluating the church long enough to evaluate yourself, your own heart, your position as you come to worship. So let's dive into it, shall we?
All right.
How do we evaluate ourselves as worshipers?
Yeah, and I think maybe we even have to just say, how would we get started at this?
Yeah, I think the primary thing we have to start with is this diagnostic question: who or what are we actually worshiping? So if we bring this all the way back to week number 1 of this series, we talked about worship meaning different things. One of the primary meanings of worship is just what our lives declare has value to us. What is worth something to us? What do we invest our time and our energy and our thoughts into? And the bottom line is, if we come together in church and we say all the right things and we go through all the religious rituals and we sing on key, we can still do worship in a way that the Lord doesn't like and doesn't accept. And that may seem harsh, but the scriptures are actually filled with God speaking like that. Check out this from Amos 5, where God through the prophet Amos says, I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps, but instead let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. So, and it's all through the prophets in the Old Testament, and Jesus echoed it in the New Testament, saying that people's lips can say the right things, but their hearts are far from him.
And I guess the idea here is that you can come and sing great music and have a great worship service, but if the rest of your life doesn't reflect it, it's not as though somehow that's your worship in that moment is pleasing to God. And God's looking for something far more than what happens 1 hour a week. And so that 1 hour a week that we're spending in worship ought to somehow be connected to and a reflection of what happens with our whole lives.
Yeah. The primary evaluator of how well you worship is, are you worshiping idols, false gods, or are you worshiping the true God? And the way to learn that is not primarily by what you say, but how you live, I think.
Okay.
Now, let's move on to a second criteria, and that is getting back to the dialogical nature of worship. Worship is a dialogue, we've been saying since episode 1. And so, do you want to worship well? Well, are you listening well? Are we listening well? When we come into church, are we prepared to hear what God is going to say to us? Are we receptive? And Deuteronomy 4, the Lord said to me, assemble the people for me, and I will let them hear my words. I think that's really cool that God wants to talk to us. He has something to say to us, and we're constantly reminded of that. As you introduce your sermons, you're always reminding us this is the central part of the service. In Reformed churches like ours, the preaching of the word is just the center point.
That's right.
And we have to be ready for that. And more than just the sermon, but we have to be listening and receptive and open throughout the entire hour together. We have to be listening for things like comfort, for correction, for invitation or calling on our lives. And you can see when we do these things in worship and some of the psalms that speak to these things, listening is hard, Listening can be harder than speaking sometimes because our lives are so filled with noise.
Well, I'm really aware of this. I mean, even for myself, just preparing for worship, sometimes you're concerned with this or with that, what's happening with the kids, or practical things that are going on in your life, and there can be a distraction. And I think there's so many things in our life that would distract us from being a good listener. And so, yeah, we've got to come with ready hearts that are receptive. Hey, God of the universe is going to speak to me today.
Yeah.
Am I ready for that?
That's a great mindset. And maybe some prayer on the drive in.
Yeah.
Or just a couple minutes or 5 minutes at home of just creating that anticipation in your spirit of not, this is what I do because I always do it, or, this is something I do because it makes me feel good.
Right.
But this is my chance to meet with the God of the universe, and he wants to say something to me today, so I'm going to be ready. Awesome. The dialogue is 2 parts, though. It also involves us speaking. And so are we learning to speak well? Learning to speak, what does that mean? And we know how to speak, right? But like we said in episode 1 or 2, I think, there's various things we need to say to God. Scripture says that there's a language we use. We need to tell him we love you, that we're sorry for our sins. We need to ask him why when things don't make sense. We need to tell him, hey, I'm listening, God. I need your help. Thank you for what you've done. What can I do? These are various things that we use in our human relationships, and we also need to say them in the divine relationship. And these are some of the parts in worship when we say those things to God. And again, some model psalms. So, are we learning to speak well, or are we just kind of saying the same old, same old?
And I think, at least in my experience, there's ways in which you can start to go through the motions. So you can actually bring things to your lips. We could sing songs and, you're singing the lyrics, but your mind's not engaged with it at all. And so we could be singing a song where we're expressing our sorrow to God for the sin that we've committed. But in fact, we're not really expressing anything.
Right.
Or we could be expressing great praise for who he is, and the song could be exalting God for all his greatness. But although the words are coming out of our lips, we're not really expressing that. And so I think there's a way in which just engagement is important as a part of this as well, because it's easy for things to become empty words, and we don't want that to happen either.
I'm often asked about that, and people are saying, what do I do if I don't feel it?
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, one of the things that I found is helpful is just doing it anyway.
Agree.
Which seems weird. It seems hypocritical. It seems non-authentic. But sometimes part of learning how to speak well is just practicing. And it's singing these songs even when you don't feel them. And praying that, engaging with God like, God, I'm really not sorry for my sin as I would like to be. And that's a great starting point, is that honesty with God of, man, I know I should be broken over this. I know I should be sorry. But I don't feel that yet. As I sing this song, could you just help me? That's really powerful. So it's learning to speak well. Another thing is, are we worshiping in spirit and in truth? And this comes from John 4, where Jesus tells the woman at the well that the time is here when God is seeking people who worship in spirit and in truth. And it basically doesn't matter if you worship on this mountain or that mountain or this building or that building or this way or that way. But the new criteria that God is looking for is in spirit and in truth, which various people interpret various different ways. And we could talk for a whole half hour just about this. But I would like to mention it in this sense, that a lot of people are really good at worshiping in spirit, and they love emotionality, and they love to really get into it, but maybe they're like this deep as far as truth goes, and there's other people that are like very, very truth-based, but there's no heart behind it.
The passion, emotion, whatever. Yeah.
And so maybe one of the applications of this verse, just real quick, is to be based in the truth and to feast on the word and to let that drive your passion. So don't be lopsided in either way. Don't have this passion without rootedness, and don't have this rootedness without passion. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I think that's helping me be a better worshiper, is to be rooted. Okay, and then I think this is our last one. Are we preparing during the week? This is a tough one, Scott. This is where it gets real.
Okay.
So read this difficult verse with me. People hate this verse, Matthew 5. If you're offering a gift at the altar and there remember your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar and go be reconciled to them. Then come and give your gift. That's difficult, right? I mean, it's not even that you have something against someone. It's just someone has something against you.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have a problem with them. There's nothing wrong, you know?
Well, this is where it really gets back to what happens throughout the whole week. Does that feed into, and does the hour of worship reflect a whole life?
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, worship is not just confined to, what happens just during 1 hour. And so if we're exalting God and we believe that the gospel is the operative principle of our life, then of course we've got to let that work its way out into every area of life. And if we don't, but then are coming and putting on a show, so to speak, on Sunday morning and mouthing that this means everything to me and God, you're so awesome and the gospel's the root of my being, then that's where it starts to become empty words, which is what God doesn't want. So I think true faith always results in, a life filled with a changed person.
Yeah. And the scriptures are pretty clear. It's impossible to love God and hate
That's right.
the people he's created, the people in your faith family. And so to come to worship with hatred or just discord is a barrier to the experience of worship. And a lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah.
They come in like, why am I not feeling anything today? It must be the band or the preacher or the environment or the architecture or whatever. When in reality, they're not feeling anything because they're coming unprepared. They're harboring this ill will toward people, and that's a big barrier to worship. So anyway, and then you hinted at this, are we rooted in the gospel? I mean, going back to week 1, it's all about the gospel. And in week 1, I think you talked about the expulsive power of a new affection.
Well, now, and this is important to me, and this is the whole thing. It's possible someone could hear this and they immediately start saying, okay, man, they're hearing what they're doing wrong.
Yeah.
Man, okay, if I start rating and evaluating myself, boy, I guess I'm not a good worshiper. Or, I'm bringing a lot of emptiness and empty words. And, you could start to beat yourself up. And if you're hearing what we're talking about that way, then either we're not doing a good job or we haven't adequately said what we need to say here, which is ultimately the gospel at the center is what really makes people good worshipers. You mentioned idolatry. You could say to yourself, okay, I've got to not love money as much anymore. I've got to not be so concerned about my work. I've got to, fix my relationships. And you might start saying, well, these are the changes I need to make. But here's the thing. When you love God and understand who he is, when you understand who we are, and then understand what God's done for us in the person of Jesus Christ, when we really grasp all those things, no one will even need to instruct you on how to worship.
Right.
It'll just, if you see God for who he is, if you see yourself for who you are, and then you know what God has done for you, man, worship, a life of worship, will just be the result.
Amen. Yeah.
And so it's, at the end of the day, the number one thing, if we want to become better worshipers, is just become more and more deeply rooted in the gospel, which is why I'm saying all the time, we've got to preach the gospel to ourselves. We've got to remind ourselves of who God is. We've got to remind ourselves of who we are. And we've got to be reminded of what God has done for us.
Yeah.
And then that new life just begins to flow.
Yeah. In seminary, we just finished talking about how the gospel is not like the entrance, into the faith.
Right.
So you accept and understand the gospel, and now you move on. But it's what also fuels this growth and this relationship with God. So, it's not only about being a better worshiper, but living the Christian life. It flows out of gratitude to God. And gratitude comes from understanding what he's done for you.
Yeah.
So,
and it's amazing what God's done for us, no doubt.
Worship is seeing and singing.
Yeah.
And the more you see, the more you'll sing. And so our task, if anything, as worship leaders is to show people more of God. And our task as worshipers is just to look, to notice the goodness of God in our lives and what he's done for us. And like you say, the response will take care of itself.
Yeah.
When we truly see. Well, this has been a great series, Scott. I think that wraps up our discussions on worship. Hope it's been helpful to you. If you missed any of the previous parts, you can find them on Facebook or YouTube.
Yeah, and feel free to comment, ask questions. We'd love to interact with people. So whatever's on your mind, let us know.
And now,
okay, the big announcement.
Big announcement.
It's time for that, huh?
Yeah.
Well, hey, let's start this way. You know, back earlier this year, I had this idea of starting a media ministry, and I just came up with this idea of the PastorCast. And Bill, it actually started really simply. I just had my iPhone in front of me, and I got on Facebook Live and started talking to people. And I had just this general idea that I wanted people to feel connection to the church, connection to the pastors of the church.
Oh,
I wanted people to know what's going on here. And here's what I found as we went along the way, which was that there were people who, as an example, hadn't been in various parts of the building. So at one point I did an episode taking people around to, the fellowship hall and upstairs and out to the courtyard and over to the school. I realized there were a lot of ministries people weren't aware of. And so, what's happening at Grace Packs or even with our preschool ministry, just as a way of talking about things that perhaps we don't get to talk about all the time on Sunday morning. Had the opportunity to film a lot of people's testimonies, which was really powerful. But then what started happening, of course, is that, from that first moment where I'm in front of my cell phone in my office to what's happened is we eventually, we started making the intros and the outros. And, at first was, I don't know if you remember this, it was a long countdown to the show starting. And then we finally decided, you know what, who wants to wait around a whole minute? Let's just start the show. And so we made it smaller. We eventually moved into the studio.
Yep.
I went out and I got a co-host. And, Bill joined here, which I thought has been a big improvement. But as we come to the holiday season, we've just decided we're going to take a little break through the month of December. And part of the reason for taking a break is just to reevaluate everything. How's the show going? What do we want to do as we restart? And so here's what we're going to do. We are actually going to stop filming through the month of December and begin to do some retooling. We'd like to know, and as we make our evaluation, what's been helpful and maybe what wasn't so helpful. What do you like? So there'll be in the comments below actually a survey we'd like for you to fill out. But you can feel free to just leave some comments as well. I'd love to know, as an example, what was your favorite episode? What's something that you really remember? I might also like to know, what was your least favorite episode and maybe why? What about the PastorCast have you liked? What could maybe make it better?
Maybe most importantly, what's been helpful?
Yeah.
What's helped your Christian life? What's been an effective outreach that you've been able to invite other people to watch? So yeah, we just want to make the show better. And as we move into 2019, just reevaluate the whole format and all. And we just want to take a objective look. And we want to see through your eyes, not ours. And so help us to see what is helpful.
So all right, most importantly, because this is going to be our final episode for the year 2018, I want to thank all of you. It's been great to just be able to interact. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being a part of this. I've heard from so many people that they watch this, that they've appreciated this or that. That keeps us going. So we appreciate that. And, as a pastor of this church, it's just so important to me that there's a connection and that we can talk things through. And so this really is not about us. It's about the audience. So thanks for tuning in every Monday night, and we'll see you next time.